I'm joined by our press reviewer, Elena Casas. Hello, Elena. And we're starting off with Syria because, of course, it's still dominating the headlines.
Of course. The Guardian has got hold of an assortment of emails. You might remember they had an exclusive batch, didn't they, back in March, which allowed us to find out an awful lot more about the Assad's private lives than we have from anywhere else. Now they've got some more which directly connect the president's relatives and close family to having directly ordered certain massacres and atrocities. Of course, it's difficult to believe that the Syrian army has been acting for months without direct orders from the top, but this is some of the closest proof we've got so far that it is being directly ordered by people close to Bashar al-Assad, if not by the president himself. His brother Maher apparently ordered a massacre of 100 people in Deraa earlier this year. They also seem to have evidence that his cousin, a brigadier general, ordered troops in that city in Deraa to fire with real bullets on protesters at the beginning of the uprising over a year ago. So they talked to human rights lawyers in that article who say that this is the closest evidence we've had so far linking the president to those atrocities, and they reckon there would be enough to connect them directly to him if he should ever come up in front of the International Criminal Court, which of course for those human rights lawyers would be the ideal solution, but we're a long way from that happening yet, and him being in a dock in The Hague, it seems like a very distant prospect. But if that ever should happen, the Guardian reckons the evidence is there to try him with war crimes, really. But of course that's a long way away. The Independent is looking at what might happen in the shorter term in Syria. They say it's on the point of a civil war, something people have been saying for a long time, but they reckon that as the Assad regime is acting with more and more impunity after it doesn't really seem to be suffering consequences from having virtually ignored what it agreed to do under Kofi Annan's six-point plan, the situation is getting more and more violent, the opposition for their part are getting more and more desperate, so the likelihood that they'll do something, the more and more violent things, gets higher and higher. They also rather mocking Kofi Annan's plan in that newspaper. The cartoon shows Annan as a butler handing a towel and soap to Assad as he crawls out of a bath full of blood.
What does the press think, then, that the international community should do to stop the crisis?
Well, the International Herald Tribune suggests that actually the Syrian regime might be more on the back foot than we realise. They're talking about the impact of financial sanctions on the regime and how difficult it is for Syrian banks to operate, and as a result, companies can't get hold of credit. Food prices are spiralling there as a result of shortages and a bad harvest. So maybe the regime is more likely to agree to something like a Yemenite solution than we think. That is, as happened in Yemen, if you remember, the president could be persuaded to leave if a lot of his regime and people close to him were allowed to stay in their jobs. The New York Times is saying today that the West's biggest hope now is to get Russia, of course a Syrian ally, to persuade Assad to agree to a solution like that. But would he really? Well, the time for talking is over, says another piece in Foreign Policy, something like trying to get him to agree to a similar solution to in Yemen. He's never going to agree to that, they say, unless he thinks the only alternative is death, and we're still a long way away from that. So Kofi Annan and his supporters need to realise there's just no time left to talk. The only way is military intervention, probably carried out by Gulf countries with Western backing, whereas in the Times they say that that's just never going to happen. The children of Hula will soon be forgotten. They say it might be a massacre to measure on the same scale as Srebrenica, but we in the international community are soon going to forget about it, and those troops are never going to be sent in.
Now, from Syria to the Eurozone debt crisis, that's still getting plenty of coverage, isn't it?
Of course it is. The Independent's looking at preparations for the total collapse of the euro after the head of Lloyd's of London, the insurers, and of the Swiss Central Bank admitted this weekend that they were preparing for that eventuality. That kind of crazy graphic they've got there actually shows whether the Eurovision Song Contest voting had much to do with the crisis. They seem to have proved in their diagram that countries like Ireland and Portugal, that are most in need of bailout cash, gave most of their Eurovision points to Germany, who's in a position to give it to them. So maybe that's even got into the song contest now, whereas The Guardian is reporting from Ireland, from a town where they've already got as far as returning to the old currency. Apparently there's nearly 300 million euros of old punts hiding in people's mattresses all over Ireland. So a town near the Northern Irish border called Clones has decided to jump on that. They've made punts legal tender, and there are people coming from all over Ireland to spend their old money there.
All right, thank you very much, Elena, for taking us through the international newspapers. You're watching live from Paris, a reminder of our top stories. The UN condemns Syria after the massacre of 100